There is a certain aura around the Juilliard School. It's a place where excellence and talent unite with prestige. Some of the biggest names of the violin world have graduated from that school. Think Itzhak Perlman, Shlomo Mintz, Sarah Chang, Midori, Pinchas Zuckerman, you name it. That makes you wonder, do these violinists have a little bit more in common than just the school that they went to? Welcome back, I'm violinist Sumina Studer, and I'm your host here on Tonebase Violin. Today we're going to be exploring from a violinist's perspective what the big deal is about probably the most well-known music school in the world, the Juilliard School. And that's leading us to finding out more about the two violin teachers that have helped to shape some of the most heavy-hitting names in the classical music world. Those two legendary violin teachers have not only helped to shape the musicianship and the careers of these violinists, but also the school that they were teaching in. And those two violin teachers are Ivan Galamian and Dorothy DeLay. Two names that are pretty much synonymous with the Juilliard School. You might have heard of Ivan Galamian from his scale system books. In fact, that was my scale system book throughout my entire life as a violinist. Alongside violin pedagogue Carl Flesch's scale system, it is the most hailed method to create a strong foundation on the violin. Ivan Galamian and Dorothy DeLay are two of the most influential violin teachers of the 20th century. Despite DeLay being not only a student of Galamian's, but also his hand-picked, chosen teaching assistant, they did not share all of the same teaching philosophies as one might think. Ivan Galamian was born in 1903 to Armenian parents. He was born in now Iran and then moved to Moscow at a pretty young age. He studied violin there and then moved to Paris, partly due to political reasons, but that's for another day, but really found his calling in teaching when he moved to the United States in 1937. He taught at the renowned Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, but ultimately grew his reputation as a renowned violin pedagogue at Juilliard, where he taught until his death in 1981. Now that we know his background, it makes a little bit more sense how he's known for his teaching method with the very expressive and fluid French school. Galamian's approach was more structured and technically oriented. He really believed in mental preparations to overcome technical challenges. Also was known to advocate to his students a practice regime that divides the practice time into three different parts. The first being scale practice for finger strength, intonation, coordination, also controlled sound production. The second being etudes to really address certain specific technical challenges, and then the actual repertoire by applying the technique into a musical context. DeLay was born in 1917 in Kansas, where she was a performer for a while, until she realized in the 1940s approximately that she really rather go into teaching than performing. So around that time she started to study with Galamian at the Juilliard School and became his teaching assistant. So she moved to New York to study with Ivan Galamian and to really kick off her teaching career. She was mainly teaching at the Juilliard School in New York City, but she also held other teaching positions on the East Coast, in New York, as well as other places in America. Now, Dorothy DeLay's teaching method really centered around an individualized approach, where she would approach a student's opinion, emotion, and personality to really bring out their musical voice. I actually had a conversation with violinist Karen Gomio, an incredible violinist touring all over the world, who has studied with Dorothy DeLay herself. So she'll be able to explain to us firsthand what it was like to be in her studio. We're here with Karen Gomio, an international concert violinist, and we are having her answer a couple of our burning questions. So is it true to say you're one of the last students that Dorothy DeLay has ever taught?
Yes, I was a student of hers during her last 7 years before she passed.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So you went to Juilliard. Can you walk us a little bit through how you met her and how your initial teacher-student experience was?
Yeah, so I met her initially when I was 9 years old. She had given a masterclass in Chicago for the Suzuki Teachers Conference. At the time, I was a Suzuki student in Montreal. So I went as one of the representatives of the Suzuki school. There were 10 kids chosen from the US, Canada, And that's where I met her for the first time, got to play for her, and she, basically offered for me to come study with her at Juilliard, which was like an absolute dream that came from nowhere. Then my mother and I moved to New York the following year, actually. So just before I turned 11, I was now in New York at Juilliard, a student of Dorothy DeLay, and basically stayed there until she could no longer teach.
That's incredible. I mean, to be handpicked by Dorothy DeLay, I mean, obviously you were a child prodigy. Would you say that Dorothy DeLay, working with younger students as well as older students, she had similar teaching methods for different ages as well?
It's a good question. I always like to tell people that I cannot speak for how she taught other students, because my experience with her felt so personalized that I can only imagine that she had that ability to look through each student in a way and to really know what that specific person needed. So my experience was that, I grew up in Montreal. It's a very peaceful place, had a very sort of normal childhood, and suddenly came to Juilliard, New York. It was a very intense experience for me. And so I really kind of hid into my shell at that point. And I think she understood that, and she saw that right away. And so her approach towards me was really about opening me up. She would ask me to bring some jokes to the next
That's
lesson.
Sweet.
Yeah. And she loved to play with a child's imagination. So I don't know if you know, but she had a degree in child psychology. So I think she really had a deep interest in understanding children, not only interest, but a talent really to understand children. I felt like her approach towards me was very gentle, very kind, very positive. I think she knew that at home I was a very self-critical practicer. So she would try to balance that by teaching me positivity and the power of positive talk, and also how to develop your own voice. So one example that I still remember and love is, I was probably 11 or something, and I played something for her, and there must have been a note that I wasn't aware sounded maybe scratchy or something, and she would say, "Oh, Sugar Plum, that note you played was very interesting. I didn't expect that to be played that way. Can you tell me more about it?" And then I would think, oh my goodness, what did I do? But that was her way of getting me to pay attention to what I was actually producing. And so she was very creative that way.
Especially with university level teachers, it can be neglected just how the pedagogical aspect really influences young children and young musicians. It's amazing to hear. Dorothy DeLay was a student of Ivan Galamian, who we all know very well through his scale books, I suppose, as well, in our homes. But what would you say are the biggest differences and similarities between Ivan Galamian's teaching methods and Dorothy DeLay's teaching methods?
Well, it's hard for me to say because I've only ever learned from Miss DeLay, and we might have used the material of Mr. Galamian. But in terms of what Miss DeLay taught me, I mean, that was very much her. I didn't dare to ask what comes from you, Miss DeLay, and what comes from Mr. Galamian. I mean, I remember the one thing that was talked about in the older students around me. Some people, especially who had come from outside of Juilliard, outside of the US even, maybe some European students, would sometimes talk about bow hold, and they would just have a chat, outside her door about the Galamian school bow hold and this school bow hold and that school bow hold. And so that was the first time that I had this understanding that there were several different schools in terms of producing a sound, simply. And I do know that Ms. DeLay taught whatever Mr. Galamian was teaching in terms of the bow hold, and this is perhaps this way of holding a little bit the bow like this rather than like that, or like this. Maybe is that the Russian way?
The Russian, yeah.
Or the Franco-Belgian way. So I can't really speak to the differences, really.
Quick shout out now. I'm going to call you out. If you are a music nerd, you should be checking out Tonebase. Don't forget to subscribe to this video so you will not miss the next one. And also leave your comments down below on what you think about Dorothy DeLay, Ivan Galamian, and the Juilliard legacy. I'm really, really curious to hear what you think. And let's carry on with the video.
The collegial aspect was very much put into the forefront when it came to Dorothy DeLay's studio classes, I heard, and the way she would have students, help each other in order to develop themselves as musicians and as humans, I suppose. How did you feel that's translated into your experience studying at Juilliard?
So you're right that in master classes, she would have somebody play, and then she would ask the other students that are listening, what do you think? And she would sometimes ask specific questions, maybe related to the music, maybe related to the technique, and that student would contribute some kind of an answer. It was part of her process of teaching us to think for ourselves. And of course, you do that in your own lessons, and she had certain ways of sending you home with some food for thought. But I think maybe her approach in studio class, asking opinions of other students, was maybe also about developing a skill of observing, not necessarily in a critical way, but also just an understanding that there are other perspectives, for the student that just played, but also for the other students to make sure that they're paying attention and that they're listening and in different ways. Not just that somebody has an opinion that comes out of the blue, but that everything that students are sharing comes from an informed place. I think my experience as a pre-college student was probably very different from college level students who perhaps had a little bit more of that collegial experience as you described. I only say that because in pre-college, the atmosphere was quite different. The parents were very much present.
Oh, yeah,
so
right.
It was kind of like, the children were there, but there was always a parent kind of hovering over you. I don't think that we had the kind of adult communication that a college level student would have had. That was my impression.
Yeah, it's really personalized, isn't it? Like just how people perceive this kind of education is very, very different to a systematic sort of rigid approach. So,
Yeah.
Very different.
Yeah, and also I think there was something about Miss DeLay where, at least when I was a student, I think many parents wanted her attention for their child.
Sure.
Because they knew that studying with Miss DeLay was not just about learning to play the violin, but it was about being introduced to people that could open doors for you, could start your career for you. Mm-hmm. Miss DeLay was very powerful in that way, and she knew many people. And if there was a conductor in town, they would reach out to Miss DeLay, and she would say, "Oh, can you listen to 4 of my students?" And sometimes there would just suddenly be a spontaneous audition that way.
Yes. Yeah.
So this was, I think, what was unique about her and why there was such a competitive atmosphere, not coming from herself, but from the parents and students. Well, in the case of pre-college, especially the parents that just were really in line trying to get her attention. That's... Yeah, that was quite unique, I would say.
I feel like Juilliard pre-college, that's very much she sort of set the groundstone of that kind of opportunity giving as well to her students, and I think that's just so precious, of course. I think I just have one last question. In your musical life today, as a soloist touring the world, collaborating with various different musicians and conductors and orchestras, of course. How would you say the DeLay belief comes to the surface the most? Is there when you're practicing or on stage, like, do you sometimes think of certain methods she's used, or is it just sort of there?
The most important gift, let's say, that she taught us students. Well, again, I can only speak for myself, but she made me learn repertoire extremely quickly. So when I first started with her, it was literally like one movement a week, one movement of a concerto a week. So in 2-3 weeks time, you've on to the next, on to the next. And it was like this. And you're talking about, Mendelssohn, Tchaikovsky, I mean, all the major, Sibelius, everything. And every now and then she would pull a sort of a test where she would call me up and say, Sugar Plum, do you know such and such piece? And I would say, no. And she would say, good, well, go and memorize it and bring it to me, in 2 days.
Memorized.
And yeah,
Wow.
yeah, she did that. She did that the first time with Tchaikovsky Waltz Scherzo. This was in Aspen. And I had, a couple of days. I had never heard the piece before, but I brought it to her memorized. And she said, okay, very good. There's a benefit concert at the end of the week. I think you should play it in concert. So it's like, boop, 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 And then the next one was Glazunov Concerto. I think she gave me up to 5 days to learn. I mean, and you know how difficult that piece is, right? So
yes, 5 days compared to 2 days as well. Like, sounds like a luxury, of course.
Yeah. But
No,
yeah,
but
so 5
enough.
days to learn that as a teenager. And but the reason she did that was really to train your learning muscle. So, and how this translates into real life, I mean, professional life, is that often people cancel and you get a call. And, if it takes you a week to bring back a concerto, well, then you've missed an opportunity because the concert is in 2 days. So it's that sort of thing. And it actually did happen to me, a pretty extreme case when I was maybe 22 or something. I was at Yellow Barn Music Festival, with my friends and playing chamber music. And suddenly my agent called and said, well, the LA Phil needs somebody to play Tchaikovsky tomorrow. Should I put you forward? And I was like, sure. And after the call, I realized, wait, when have I last played that piece? And I realized it was eight years before. I hadn't played it in 8 years, but I was so trained to be able to say yes to these things because that was part of Miss DeLay's training. And I know that there was a purpose to that. There's a reason to that. And again, it goes back to her having this child psychology degree and understanding the possibilities of a brain, of a child's brain. She really had full faith in the capacity of a child to learn really quickly. So I think that's what I carry to this day from her teaching, is just the ability to learn quickly and to be able to step in when necessary and so on.
My observation when diving into the world of Dorothy DeLay is that her emphasis on the psychological aspects of teaching can partially be attributed to a modernized, a trend in modernization in the teaching method, where the players or the students' confidence and progress really comes out through positive reinforcement. That, with a heavier emphasis on communication between the teacher and the student, resulted in DeLay really prioritizing musical interpretation and personal expression. Galamian's teaching method, on the other hand, was a little more systematic and perhaps methodical, and really involved a strong emphasis on technical foundation. In the meantime, DeLay's approach was perhaps a little bit more adapted to the individual player, bringing out the layered needs of the student. That includes the mental, emotional, and situational needs, focusing on the overall growth of musicianship. Well, we can observe that the two of them have very much in common, and that's something that I really get inspired by, is that sure, technique is important and it needs to be built. However, it's only important so that you can express yourself correctly. If you haven't built out your technique, it can be extremely limiting in how you musically express yourself. And at the end of the day, we don't say, I play technique. We say, I play music, right? That's what I really see that Ivan Galamian and Dorothy DeLay had in common. I must say, researching for today's video did not only teach me about different teaching styles and methods, but also the rise of my alma mater, Juilliard, which, like any educational institution, really relies on the teachers, and we cannot stress that enough. Now, if you have any experience with different teaching styles, whether that be you as a teacher yourself or as a student, I would absolutely love to read about it in the comment section, so please drop them down below. You can of course also, as always, contribute your own video ideas on topics that I should investigate next. Until then, don't forget to subscribe to Tonebase Violin, and I shall see you in the next video. Bye!